check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
We've got a Bears roundtable, everybody. A Chicago Bears end of season roundtable. I'm Dan Weeder of the Chicago Tribune, joined by Mark Potash of the Chicago Sun-Times, Jeff Dickerson of ESPN, an old friend, Rich Campbell. You don't have an affiliation anymore. How you guys doing?
I'm doing.
My affiliation is a friendly one, as you can see.
We are better than the Bears, Dan. We are better than the Bears.
That goes without saying, Jeff. You've been on this beat a long, long time, as has Mark. It's been a long time. I believe this weekend is the 10-year anniversary of their last playoff victory. So remember that beautiful moment in team history. It's been 10 years since. And they are coming out now, guys, from not only an 8-9 season that included a playoff loss to the New Orleans Saints, but they're coming out of a press conference this week on Wednesday that I know I talked to you, Mark, earlier in the week. This should have been a routine day on Wednesday at Hallis Hall to wrap up a season that was disappointing and was going to culminate with no changes. And they somehow turned it into a landmark moment for the franchise with the way they handled their explanations of everything. Mark, you've been around a long time. What does it compare to? What were your reactions on Wednesday afternoon?
Well, my reaction was just, I guess, disappointment. I mean, something stronger than disappointment, but or dismay or whatever, just in the way they handled it, because I think we knew that what was going to happen. But like you said, Dan, the way they explained it, it was just the most disappointing thing to me was I felt like, Ryan Pace has always been very close to the vest, and I thought candor should have been his penance in this situation. I thought he should have been much more open. Tell us, his way isn't working. This spy versus spy thing is not working. And I think he owed it to us, to the Bears fans, to say a little bit more about what the quarterback situation is, where he stands, how he's going to solve it, and most of all, in retrospect, why he messed up the Mitch Trubisky pick. And he couldn't have ignored that. He defiantly ignored that. That angered me, frankly.
The skilled dodgeball player there, and he was able to meander around that question. Jeff, by the time that Ryan and Matt came on that Zoom press conference the other day, the press conference was already 45 minutes old, and the Bears were losing in a blowout. I'm wondering what you're thinking as you're going through the opening statements from George and Ted and listening to them almost celebrate a season that by any measure was a disappointment following one of the most disappointing seasons in franchise history the previous year.
So do you guys remember the infamous Three Bears press conference after the 2009 season? Potsy's shaking his head. So back in 2009, the Bears had just come off their third consecutive playoff-less season, right? And they had a press conference, and there was a lot of anticipation. Was Lovie Smith going to be fired? What was going to happen with Jerry Angelo? Ted Phillips, what is he doing? Well, how does he fit into all this? Same questions we have now about Ted, ironically. But they strode up there, and not only were they defiant, and I would say probably Lovie and Ted were by far the most defiant. Jerry would always cut a joke or two, and there wasn't a lot of vitriol coming out of him. But not only were they defiant, they also gave themselves contract extensions that day. So not only were they celebrating 3 straight years of missing the playoffs, they were so convinced that the franchise was on the right path that they patted themselves on the back with extensions. Now, they did not announce the extensions on Wednesday. I was waiting for that, guys. I thought, here's the last thing. This is the grand finale is they're going to say that these guys have extensions because Pace has 1 year left. I don't know why they wouldn't say it. He's got 1 year left, and Nagy has 2. And there aren't many GMs that want to operate as a lame duck with a 1-year deal. So I'm not sure if in the future we're not going to get that announcement, but at least they were smart enough not to announce it on Wednesday. But as far as the Three Bears, I mean, there was, you guys remember the Trustman? We want to be selfish and undisciplined. They were. But that was more of just a mistake. This wasn't a mistake. This was their intent. And unfortunately, man, if they were in a class entitled crisis management, the Bears would have gotten an F on Wednesday.
Rich, you were part of this beat for 7 seasons, 2013 through 2019. You took a life raft in 2020. I wish we could tell you that something different occurred during the season, but as you know, you followed it. They were 8-8. They got embarrassed in the playoffs against the Saints and showed exactly where they stand. I'm curious, with some separation from this, with a little bit of a different perspective now, what you feel in a week like this. I'm sure you're still on Twitter. I'm sure you're still following the things that are being said and covered. How you put this into any sort of context based on what you've covered and based on how you know this fan base feels.
Well, I listened to how you guys have described this press conference, right? None of you have used the word surprised. You're dismayed, maybe baffled, disappointed. No one is surprised. No one is surprised that Ted and George sat there and praised the culture of a team that lost 6 in a row and went 8-8, and hey, they made it to the end. Okay. I mean, the questions remain about holding the organization to a certain standard, frankly, a standard they haven't been able to achieve, one of excellence in everything they do. Can they evaluate the football team? They just haven't been able to do that. And so it's the same thing. I wasn't surprised at all, not only by what they said and some of the disappointing elements of that. I know the fan base is really shocked in just the hollowness of those explanations. But I wasn't surprised that they kept Ryan and Matt either, for the reasons that we can get into. But JD, you mentioned it, just contractually and in the era of COVID, where there are a lot of uncertainties to the business side of the team. You stick with these guys for another year, and if it doesn't work, then maybe you detonate the whole thing then.
We're going to play a little game here. We're going to go around this circle here, a really fast game here. I wanted to know when this ended what the Bears actually achieved this season. And so I wrote down on my notepad here 3 things that I think they achieved in the 2020 football season. And we're going to give these each a label. It's either going to be shrug, fist pump, or parade. So let's start here. Wild card berth. Shrug, fist pump, or parade, Mark?
That's a shrug the way it turned out.
Rich?
It's a shrug because they wouldn't have gotten that wild card berth under the way the playoffs were structured up until this year.
JD?
It's a shrug. They lost 8 of their last 11. Playoff team, the Bucs. I mean, I know playoff appearances are rare around here in Chicago, but I mean, that's the ultimate shrug to get in that way.
All right. The next accomplishment, which was held up in high regard on Wednesday in that press conference, no finger pointing during a 6-game losing streak. Potsy, shrug, fist pump, or parade?
Is there anything worse than shrug?
Eye roll.
Okay,
Hard eye roll.
Eye roll, anger, fist punch. I mean, that really exposed them, that they were patting themselves on the back for getting themselves out of a hole that they got themselves into. I mean, that just made no sense.
Rich, Potsy, as usual, is trying to change the rules of the game and add categories. So now it's shrug, fist pump, parade, eye roll, or fist punch.
I'll add another one. I just slept through that whole question. I mean, what? Potsy makes the perfect point. You're commending yourself for digging out of a hole that you got into, and again, it just shows you what their standard is. I mean, their standard is so low that's the participation ribbon they give themselves.
JD, do you want to add a 7th column to the Scantron form here?
I almost lost consciousness. Honestly, I stroked out. They created the adversity. This was self-created adversity. And do you guys remember the game in Cleveland back in 2013?
Of course.
When Phil and Tressman, those boneheads, they bench McCown and they put Jay back in. And the Bears somehow backed their way into this win. And that game was the springboard for the Bears justifying Jay's second contract extension. And Phil got up there and said, I mean, the way that he rose above the adversity in Cleveland. Phil, he threw 2 interceptions in the first quarter. He created that adversity. I mean, it's because of him that he had to dig himself out of it. So, I mean, like, why that is rewarded is beyond me.
I'll have to go back through the 15-page transcript and make sure whether all 4 of those men, Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy, George McCaskey, and Ted Phillips, brought up the 6-game losing streak. I was sitting there screaming at my laptop saying, you know what great teams do? They don't finger point, and they stop the losing streak after 2 games. right? It doesn't go to 56 days and 6 games. And they don't get to that point where they get to test this great character in the locker room because they're focused on kicking the tail of the next opponent they're going to play. All right, I got one more thing that we accomplished. We'll see how many more categories Potsy can add to this. The offense played better in December. Shrug, fist pump, or parade?
Oh, absolute shrug. I mean, that was fool's gold almost from the start, wasn't it? I mean, we called that one as soon as it happened, just looking at the defenses they were going up against, and sure enough, it was exposed in the last 2 games. So an absolute shrug.
Campbell,
I'm going to give it a fist pump. From my point of view, made it a lot more interesting to see the observers of this team separate into who thinks it's real and who thinks it's not. And there were plenty who were very excited about that uptick. Some within the team, of course, but you knew that the real tests were coming at the end of the season, and they did, and it exposed everything. So I appreciated that uptick for what it ended up exposing.
Jeff.
That's a good point. I mean, it was so fraudulent, and they had a chance. See, this is the thing. If they would have just ended the year by winning 3 straight against Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville, then we would have this debate raging all off season. Well, was that real? Was that not real? But they had the opportunity to prove to people that, in fact, it was real if they would have played well against Green Bay and New Orleans, and they failed miserably, guys, against both of those teams.
I initially was upset that they backed into the playoffs because I didn't think they were worthy of a wild card berth. I didn't think they deserved the opportunity to play in the playoffs based on the way they got in, based on the way their entire season went. In retrospect, I am thrilled that they got that opportunity to play that game and have another measuring stick game, because it means your last 2 games of the season were against the best 2 teams in the NFC. And both of them beat you by double digits, and both of them controlled those games, and both of them showed you just how far away from being a legitimate championship contending football team you really are. And I think it was great for everyone that they got to take those tests back to back and test what they thought were meaningful improvements in December and prove to everyone that maybe not so meaningful.
Hey, Potsy, you'll appreciate this. When Frank Robinson was the manager of the Nationals in DC, I was able to cover him for a very short time. And Frank Robinson would say, there are Hall of Famers and there are people in the Hall of Fame. And I felt that way about the playoffs this year in the NFC. There are playoff teams and there are teams in the playoffs. And the Bears were a team in the playoffs.
And it used to be you could turn that playoff berth into something big, but no longer, and certainly not a team like the Bears. The one thing, and I guess we can get to this later, is I think the worst thing about this is, maybe it's bad, maybe it's not, is it's put them in the same situation they were in 2018, where they think they have an offensive line. Yeah. And that's a huge question heading into the offseason. Maybe the biggest one, considering they're not going to really solve their quarterback situation, is they think they have an offensive line. And I don't know if they do, James Daniels' return notwithstanding. That's a big issue, I think. But that's that to me, that's what I got out of that. A real negative result out of that is that now they're going to think, just like in 2018, that they solved this situation. And I don't know if they have.
I want to dive a little deeper on the quarterback situation in a minute. But the one question that I was really eager to ask George McCaskey on Wednesday, and it's one of the questions that Colleen Kane and I, my colleague at the Tribune, starred as we went into that press conference. It was, George, from your perch, as you evaluated the 2020 season, what indicators did you grab onto that told you were making meaningful progress toward winning a championship? George's answer, of course, as you all know, the first name that he mentioned on this team in that press conference was Darnell Mooney, who, to his credit, 5th-round rookie, emerged as a reliable starter, good number 2 receiver, finished 46th in the league in receptions and 61st in receiving yards. That was the first guy that George could go to, saying that Ryan Pace can find you reliable second-tier starters in the 5th round. We need to do more of that. That was the answer to the question on what you saw in the 2020 season that indicated progress toward a championship. Your reaction, Jeff?
Well, if you're looking for a guy that's going to give you 60 catches and 600 yards, yeah, Ryan Pace is your GM to find that guy. I mean, to me, I think it all goes back to the whole point of this is that, George likes to say, I'm not a football guy, right? I admit, I'm just a fan. I'm not a football guy. He defends Ted Phillips for, he doesn't meddle in football decisions. They are both in charge of the football team. And why that is being portrayed as not being true, they go to such great lengths to cover up the fact that they are, in fact, the guys making the decision. George McCaskey empowers Ted Phillips to be the team president, okay? When they decide who's going to be fired and who's not going to be fired, the ultimate say is George McCaskey. How can you say that he is not a football guy involved in football decisions? Same thing with Ted Phillips. And this is why, guys, really, the biggest wasted opportunity of all of this was the moment where they could have said, Ted, thank you for your service, sir. Here's your gold watch. Retire. Or literally just be the president of business operations, change your title, and put someone in there above the GM for another layer of accountability. This was the exact moment, guys, to do this. People have been talking for this for years, and they didn't do it.
Not only did they not say that, not only did they not do that, but George went out of his way early on in his opening statement to hold Ted up as a leader he trusts and respects and believes in thoroughly. And among the reasons that he gave for trusting Ted Phillips to be the leader of an organization that's trying to win a championship is that he communicated well with employees through the pandemic. He allayed the fears of employees who thought they were going to be furloughed. This is not what the Chicago Bears fan base was sitting in front of that press conference to hear, that Ted made the employees inside the building at Hallis Hall feel better during uncertain economic times. We're talking about trying to win a trophy in a cutthroat billion-dollar industry. And I want to swing this over to you, Potsy, because you pressed George on Ted's role in that press conference. And to your credit, you followed up on your first question when he didn't answer it properly. And I think your point was, why exactly do you trust Ted to evaluate the men that make the decisions about your football team when he doesn't know football? His first answer to you was, I just want to make it clear, Ted doesn't meddle in football decisions. And your point was, exactly. So what is his purpose? Is this kind of like having my banker neighbor from down the block come over and assess the repairs on my car that my mechanic made? He just looks at it and goes, looks good to me, goes back down to his house.
Yeah, exactly, Dan. Judging the GM and the coach, those are football decisions, and they're making them. And that's why I think, that wasn't a good. We've already come up with 2 or 3 examples of why, George and Ted just should not have anything to do with anything that has anything to do with anything on the football field. Look at he values the Darnell the success of Darnell Mooney over the failure of Mitch Trubisky. That they value that how they handled the 6-game losing streak instead of the 6-game losing streak. That's bad judgment. That shows you that that's when you're not rooted in football. You don't understand what success and failure is. And the whole press conference was just a great example of their bad judgment, their bad management, their inability to read the room, just everything about how they, God bless them. They're a great, I keep saying this, they're a great Chicago family, but the McCaskeys should just have nothing to do with the Chicago Bears. They should actually not even be in the building, in my opinion. They just be owning, they can own the team. And like Jim Finks told Ed McCaskey one year when he said, what do owners do? They go to the games.
Rich, to your previous point, you talked about none of us being surprised by Wednesday, but there were points where I was slightly surprised because they came across as more directionless than even I thought after 8 seasons. Even more, to Potsy's point, out of touch with exactly what they're looking for. When you start prioritizing personality traits over results, you're finished. I mean, this is, like I said, $1 billion cutthroat industry that requires you to be sharp every damn day to achieve at the highest level. If you want to be average, the Bears got the formula on that surrounded. And maybe those are the below average teams are talking to Ted and saying, you got the culture that we want. We want to emulate that culture that raises our floor from 13 losses to 10 losses, right? Like, you guys have got that. You figured it out. You're going to be average to slightly below average with that culture, but you're not going to achieve anything meaningful. And Rich, you watched it here. 7 years, you watched them not achieve anything meaningful outside of the division championship in 2018, which was one of those flashes where it looks like it's there, and then all of a sudden it's like a Jenga tower. It just topples with one push of the blocks.
So why this emphasis on culture and this sort of intangible vibe over just having a game breaker offensively, having speed offensively, players that can scare you, players that keep defensive coordinators up at night. What has come to ingrain this in George McCaskey's mind that is the bullseye rather than these other elements that we're talking about here? It's not like that's changed. George has continued to demonstrate this type of judgment flaws over the years. To me, I woke up on Monday morning and I thought to myself, they're going to keep him. And the reason I thought they were going to keep him is because it's easy for them to do it. It's a path of least resistance because they can still hit the detonator next season. Okay. And they could say, look, we just contractually made it to the end of Ryan and Matt, and we became comfortable. We could jettison them then. They could do the same thing with Ted at that point, JD, if they wanted to. But for me, the hangup is by bringing Ryan back, you've empowered him to pick the next quarterback. And he's going to pick the next quarterback. He's not going to go into the draft and go, you know what, we could use a receiver here. No way. He's going to take any, trade ammunition he's got, and he's going to go up and get a quarterback, because if he doesn't, he's not going to be there next year to use those picks. And so that, to me, was the most revealing part of what happened in those press conferences, is that you had such a flaccid endorsement of why they essentially decided to let Ryan Pace pick the next QB.
The flaw, Rich, to your point or to Dan's question, is that the McCaskeys are nice people and they value being nice more than anything else. That's why they like Phil Emery. They connected with Phil Emery.
It's why they like Ryan too. Ryan's a nice person.
What's that?
It's why they like Ryan too. Ryan's
right.
A nice
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but even going back to they liked Phil Emery. They connected with him. Phil's a little different guy too, and just like them, he connected with him. And Phil was very much like Trestman. They connected. So that's how you got into that situation. But look, it took absolute dysfunction for them to kind of go against their grain and actually make that sudden change. That was actually a quick trigger for the McCaskey family, if you remember, but it took the dysfunction, and there wasn't that. That's why I knew absolutely they were going to lean on the way Ryan and Matt worked together, how well, as long as that was going strong, that was going to be good enough for them, and it was.
I wrote down here on my pad here that they value good people who work hard and work together, and they confuse those as indicators of success rather than prerequisites for success, right? They think that suddenly means you've done something, when all it does is give you a chance to do something, and then you've got to actually follow up with results. JD, you've been around this team for almost 2 decades, right? Like, you've seen good culture, bad culture, culture in between, terrible teams, great teams, teams in between. I'm just curious how you see the evolution of the culture and why they believe that this current setup gives them something that distinguishes them in some ways. Because I can promise you, the 8 teams that are playing in playoff games this weekend, they don't envy the Bears culture any way, shape, or form. They're excited to play playoff football on Saturday and Sunday.
I had a former coordinator. I heard him say once, you want good culture? Win. That's it. Winning creates culture. Bottom line. And I think we're all nice people here for the most part. I mean, I like nice people. I like working with nice people. That's our approach. That's my approach. But I mean, you can still find people that do their job well and are nice. And there's also bad people in this business who haven't do the job very well sometimes too. Well, that's just unfortunately, at the end of the day, you got to win. Look, I'm fine with the fact that there was not a cult inside Hallis Hall this year. That doesn't mean that everything else is overlooked. So I think culture matters, but the only culture is winning culture. They don't know, guys, how to establish a winning culture. I mean, the numbers are absurd. 4 playoff wins since Dickon was fired. 4 playoff wins.
0 since I've been here.
I mean, it's just that lack of success is crazy to me. Ted's been the president since 1999. I'm not trying to keep going back to Ted, but I mean, this has been going on forever. And the fact that they can't acknowledge that and they can't change that. I know we'll talk about the quarterback, but Rich mentioned the quarterback and Ryan trading up. I thought the only real sort of takeaway I had that could have been positive from Wednesday is that in my mind, there's no way Trubisky's back. I thought Pace finally, after we have been pressing him for years to acknowledge that this just isn't good enough, I think he finally has come to the realization that if he's really in fact going to have this relationship with Nagy where they work together to find the quarterback, there's no way, guys, tell me if I'm wrong, there's no way Matt Nagy walks into that office this year and says, I want Mitch back as my quarterback next year.
On the contrary, I think he's done with it. I think he's going to start over. I think he's going to be calling plays next year with a quarterback who fits his system. Maybe it's Foles, maybe it's not, but it's going to be something. He wants to do it. He wants to run Andy Reid's offense his way with his quarterback, the way it fits, calling the plays. He's going to start over. That's what I'm predicting. I don't know for sure, but I think he's, as much as he likes Trubisky, I think he's kind of done with that. He's done with retrofitting his offense, the offense he was brought here to run, just so he can maximize Trubisky and basically kind of save his job. And I think he's going to start over with a quarterback who fits the offense in his vision. And I think that's what you're going to see in the offseason.
Remember Ryan Pace. Remember Ryan Pace when they traded up to draft Mitch? No regrets, right? So they said no regrets. Could you think of a greater regret you might have than being given one final chance to save your job as a GM? A long shot chance. A lot of people expected him to be fired. Here comes the lifeline. Some mercy from George and Ted. If he said, okay, we're going to try this one more time and we're going to stick with Mitch, there's just no way. Pace is too smart for that. And he's a survivalist at this point. He will not bring back Mitch. No way.
So what I'm hearing you guys say, I'm new at this. I don't know all the ins and outs of the NFL, but that having a good starting quarterback is worth more than locker room culture. That's what I'm getting here. And I guess we can dig into that a little more and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Once again, George said the same things about culture on Wednesday as he said a year ago when they came out of 2019 and they said they didn't point fingers during the long losing streak. The only difference this year was the losing streak was actually longer. It was 6 games instead of 4. Right. And so they figured out how to not point fingers for a longer period of time. But to this quarterback conversation, Potsy, you know where they've got to go here. And they use that word collaboration. I think Pat Tomasulo of WGN counted at 16 times there was some form of the word collaboration or collaborative or collaborate used in that press conference. It's clear they're directing that towards the hunt for a new quarterback. And it's clear that's a sort of subtle acknowledgement that there was not enough collaboration in 2017. It left the Bears with Trubisky, the Chiefs with Mahomes, the Texans with Watson, and it left the Bears to reboot here in 2021. And now they have to have Ryan and Matt put their heads together and go find the guy that you say should be the guy running Matt's offense for Matt.
And of all the things you probably thought were balderdash that we heard the other day, the idea that he has more help is actually, I think, legitimate. I mean, when he picked Trubisky, John Fox was out of the loop, as you guys know. And Dave Ragone was like his go-to guy, and Dave's a great guy, but especially at that point of his career, he didn't have near the expertise in judging quarterbacks or whatever. That's all he had. That was a Pace decision. The argument now is that he's got much more brain power, if you want to call it that, with Nagy, who was part of the process that picked Mahomes. I don't know the details of it, but I'm assuming he was in favor of that. And then you've also got, Laser and DeFilippo. So theoretically, he's in a better chance to not make the same mistake. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, or I'm not saying it's right, but to me, I say that is a fair point. But I would also say one other thing. I think the Bears, unless they get one of these top 3 guys and move up, mortgage or whatever, they're still going to be in the same position as I think they were this year with Foles or Trubisky. They need an offense who will make their quarterback better. They don't have a quarterback who will make their offense better. And so they're going to be unless they get one of those top 3 guys, Trevor Lawrence or whatever, and the other 2 guys, I think they're going to be in that position where they still need to be better on offense. So I guess what I'm saying is that they're not going to solve this quarterback situation unless they make some really bold move.
It's fascinating to me because 2017, both Ryan and Matt were a part of this historic quarterback class and evaluating that class. And Ryan has one of the biggest whiffs in league history on his resume. And Matt was part of a process in Kansas City that produced a grand slam, right? And so now they can get their binders out and compare notes. And you hope that they will steer more towards Matt's binder in this regard. And okay, that seemed like it worked better for you than it did for us. Jeff, you've seen a lot of starting quarterbacks come in and out of this city. I'm curious your thoughts on this next hunt. It's another Control-Alt-Delete and figure out what comes up on the screen.
Well, I'll answer that, Dan, because I think like you're right. The situation was different. Unfortunately, the timing is important too, and unfortunately, they don't have a top 3 pick this time. So they missed their chance basically, and now they're going to have to kind of make something happen, and that's why the idea that they have more brain power available is kind of nullified by the fact that they don't have this number 3 pick, and they're going to be looking for. I don't know. They got to find somebody in the 3rd round like Russell Wilson, or somebody in the 6th round like Tom Brady. They got to catch lightning in a bottle. That's kind of the theme of the Bears' existence right now.
Dan, I've been struck by the irony, and like you guys have mentioned, that they've been, Ryan and Matt have been praised for this collaboration, and yet the entire reason they are in this predicament is because Pace did not collaborate on the quarterback decision. I mean, he is being treated as this reformed, miscreant here who's come back to them and, okay, now I'm ready to collaborate. Now that I have a coach I can trust. Well, I just don't think you would find a luckier, more fortunate GM in the history of the league to have the opportunities that Ryan has had, to make all the top 10 picks he has, to anonymously and secretively choose a franchise quarterback number 2 overall, to rebuild the entire team's headquarters. He's gotten every resource and every chance anyone could ever dream of. You're talking 99.9th percentile. And he's going to get another shot at it. And he's going to draft one. If he doesn't draft a QB in the 1st round, I'll be stunned. Trade any draft pick you got to trade to go up and get a guy you like, because otherwise, who cares? He's not using those draft picks.
So here's the good news. The Kansas City Chiefs in 2017 owned the number 27 overall pick. So being at 20 doesn't mean you're hopeless. If you find a guy you love, you can use the ammo to climb up that draft board and find the spot on that draft board you need to go. The Chiefs were picking 27th overall in 2017 and walked out of the first night of the draft with Patrick Mahomes, who's going to be their quarterback for 15 years, right? So the chance is there. You just got to get it right. And it's a monumental task, and it's a monumental task that they've failed at over and over and over again. And obviously in high-profile fashion 4 years ago, they had their best opportunity to get it right. They got it wrong. And to your point, Rich, now they get a chance to do it over. Ryan gets a chance to do it over. And you're right. He has to feel like the luckiest man on the face of this earth. Potsy, one more thing before we get out of here. This defense has taken a step back since 2018. There's no doubt about it. Chuck Pagano found a very good, well-timed retirement here to walk out the door just as the defense is backsliding. Your thoughts on where they go on that side of the ball, given that was supposed to be a championship level defense for 5 or 6 years, and now all of a sudden they've gone from elite to pretty good.
Well, again, Dan, it's a timing situation. After they lost Brandon Staley, in retrospect, yeah, it would have been great if they would have promoted him, because now he's this red hot head coaching candidate because he did a fantastic job with the Rams. Now that makes you think, hey, maybe we shouldn't lose maybe we can't let Jay Rodgers go. So now maybe they'll make the promotion of like Jay Rodgers, but we don't know if Jay Rodgers is a coordinator. I mean, I don't know if we knew Brandon Staley was. You just don't know. So maybe they could do that. So maybe they'll make the inside move when they should have made it 3 years ago. So, I mean, again, timing is everything. So I don't know what they're going to do. In
terms of inside moves, don't be surprised if Sean Desai is the next Brandon Staley in terms of a guy that takes a swing at it. We'll see what they do. Again, I just walked into this offseason knowing that they were in a state of desperation and lacking some direction. And you just left Wednesday feeling like, whoa, it's far easier to sit here on January 15th and say this team's going to lose 10, 11 if they add a 17th game, possibly 12 games next season, unless they get a lot of things right. And I don't think we were expecting to say that when we all walked out of Rosemont, 24 months ago or whatever it was, 20 months ago. It's
a tough. I feel bad for Bears fans who have been following this team for a long time, because the Bears are in a situation where, like I said, they're trying to their best hope is to catch lightning in a bottle. And at 8-8, you can actually do that. We haven't really discussed it, but there's a possibility that this might be the right move. Not work out to be the right move because of the way things happen in the NFL. But on the other hand, if you've looked at those teams, and I am a staunch believer that you can't trust the schedule in January because it always seems to flip. But on the other hand, on paper, even with that, when you look on paper, boy, that looks like it has 4 and 12 possibilities written all over it if you look at their schedule. So if their defense, which is another interesting point, it's like writing about the defense just today, it's hard to tell if they are headed for a fall or if they could be rejuvenated by some new coordinator. They get Eddie Goldman back. Roquan Smith theoretically is healthy, but do they lose Akeem Hicks and because of salary cap situation? I mean, that's their anchor as a defense, and even that is not a sure thing. That tells you just how difficult a situation the Bears have heading into 2021.
Rich, where were the Redskins when they jumped up the draft board to get RG3?
They were about, I want to say 9 or 10. You put me on the spot. Yeah, they did move up. I mean, the way the Bears are positioned now, though, they're well within range to move up and get somebody that they like. The question is how much convincing do the Bears have to do for themselves to fall in love with a guy? Do you have to go draft a guy because that's your only life preserver and then just sort of talk yourself into it? Or is it truly there, and can you truly do something with it?
There's no doubt about it. So what I'm picking up from you guys, from what you're laying down, is that as we look ahead to the 2021 Bears, it's a shrug. It's not a fist pump or a parade. It feels like we're all on the same page with this, that this does not feel like it's positioned to suddenly be a breakthrough. And if that's the case, and if they do lose 10, 11, 12 games next year, then they're having the conversation that everyone expected them to be having here. And now you are even more directionless than your already very directionless ways.
And if that happens,
it's an easy conversation next year, right? I mean, they took the path of least resistance this week.
Right.
Next year, it's an easy one. The decision's made for them.
Yeah.
Right. And so they kind of copped out.
But taking it back to the very beginning of this in the press conferences, George McCaskey and Ted Phillips lost a huge chunk of the fan base on Wednesday. And if this thing heads downhill, there's going to be a revolt. There's going to be a fan revolt. They remember this, and that's what. So the people who are on the spot in 2021 are not Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. They know what's up. It's really Ted and George, because I think if the Bears, after what happened Wednesday, the Bears, like I said, if they go downhill again, and we're back in the situation, this "I told you so, you should have made this move last year" situation. People are going to be called, even though they don't have contracts, or at least George doesn't, they're going to be calling for their heads.
Remember last year, the Super Bowl ended with the quarterback that the Bears passed, Patrick Mahomes, holding up the Lombardi trophy. It's very possible that 3 weeks from now, the quarterback holding up that Lombardi trophy is the guy who wears the green number 12 jersey up the road in Wisconsin. And you talk about back-to-back years of pouring salt in the wounds. That would be it right there, right? That would be the biggest exclamation point that could possibly be put on this season to tell the Bears just how absolutely far away they are from their division rivals. It could very well happen. You guys know how much I appreciate your football acumen, your honesty, your candor. I don't know who sniped JD out of here, but we thank him for joining us. JD. For when he could join us. Mark, thank you. Rich, thanks for taking time out of your new schedule to jump on with us. Really enjoyed it, fellas.
Thanks, Dan. Good to see you guys.
For everybody else out there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe. It's down here. It's over here. Wherever that button is, subscribe. We'll bring more content to you as we go along. Thanks, guys.